Welcome to Books Boys, live from the Grand Library, the Dean and PJ.
He's PJ.
Hello there.
I'm the Dean, and we are the Books Boys.
The one and only.
And this is the Books Boys show. Get it? Buy it? Books.
Books. Still a mystery to me. I've been looking in my bathroom cupboard looking for books, but is that the right place to find Herodotus and the like, Dean? Because I
think
couldn't
it
find
is.
them. Okay.
I think if you open it like a scroll, you'll find some round paper. You open it up, and there might be some markings on there, and that might be Herodotus. I think.
Invisible ink. Okay. Fair enough.
It's hard to say. The technology eludes me.
It's very hard. It's paper, you know. Paper. I mean, I was looking for that play the other day. You know, that O'Neill play in the forest. I forgot which tree it was on, and then I lost, you know, the branches and the words, and got all very.
It's tricky.
But then I got confused. I thought it was a Beckett play, you know, because it was very absurdist, and I thought that was the point of the play, like getting lost between the branches, the words between the leaves, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's tricky because they tell us that the books, they come on paper, they come from trees. We go out to the paper store, we look at the toilet paper, we go to the forest, we don't see the books. And
they say like it comes from the minds of people, including dead people. I think it's very macabre. So how do I imagine that? It just spills out of the brain, kind of onto the leaves. What's going on there? This is getting very dark, Dean.
It's a confusing topic, man. It's a confusing topic. Do you know where I was today? I was in the Maclay Library at Queen's University, which you'll remember from our old days.
I love that library.
I didn't realize before that I was looking at all these books that have, you know, history and philosophy. If I would just go up one more story, they've got actual novels, English novels, French novels, Spanish novels. I never knew that before.
Did I know that?
In the decade that I've been going there? No.
Yeah, and a good selection. I love all the books they
never
have
noticed, there. But some of the stuff, man, I got into this aisle, and it was an entire aisle of early English texts. So we're talking like very, very early. You can't read it. It's Old English. Like, it doesn't make sense. And the titles will just be like, you know, description of a nunnery in 10 volumes. Like, I can't cope with that, you know?
Description of a nun. Imagine reading that in your free time, you know? Imagine being busy and then squeezing in time to read the full 10 volumes. And then
I feel bad, and maybe I'm hard on myself. There's, you know, because I do read the history, and we'll get to that in a minute. But some of the stuff, I just can't do it, man. Like, I'm loving my Greek history, and then it'll be, you know, people like Strabo or Pausanias who wrote geographies. It's like I can't read a 2 or 3 volume set just describing the landscape. Like, I can't do that, man. That's really, really dull.
Some people call that art, you know. Yeah, Walt Whitman would have a thing to say about that.
I guess, you know, and then Plutarch's Moralia, but that's 16 volumes. Like, I don't have the time for that, you know?
You get the impression that all these people, they had an abundance of time, you know.
I think they've had a lot of time, yeah, to write 16 volumes. And in fact, it's 15 volumes, and then the 16th volume is just the index. The index gets a whole volume. It's ridiculous.
Imagine saving money for a few months, buying those volumes, and then you miss out on volume 16. You know, you just wanted that index. That's the main book. That's where it gets funky.
I really want to read it, you know, but it's just sometimes it's too much, and I've got a limited time for, you know, and it's too much.
And you've got a high tolerance, you know.
I do.
You got a very high
tolerance. In fact, I'll go straight into that because the first thing I read this month was Herodotus. Now, I actually read 3 books because this was a multi-volume set. It was actually a 4-volume set, but I gave up after 3. There's only so much I can do here. A 3-volume set of Herodotus' Histories. Now, if you don't know, some people call Herodotus the father of history. Those people are wrong. That is Thucydides. Well, Herodotus essentially, you know, he was the first great historian. But I'm going to give a few quotes, which will give you an example as to why I don't think he's a real historian. And This is not something radical I'm saying. I think a lot of people do agree with me in the academic world. He mixes in a bit too much legend, a bit too much fable, a bit too much mythology for it to be real history. Whereas Thucydides, who's the next great historian, is pure scientific history, short-term causes, long-term causes, effects, what we would call history today. Herodotus is like, well, this is like an episode of Game of Thrones at times, and it's just a little bit...
Probably more entertaining, though, is it? That's the idea, right? It's more like it's more literary, kind of, yeah.
It's like halfway between Thucydides and Homer, like it's got that...
Right, okay.
It is entertaining, but... I'm going to give you an example. So one of the first stories we see in it. Now, it happened that this chap, Candaules, was in love with his own wife, which apparently was unusual.
That's very unusual. Yeah. That's a strange thing to happen.
So he says to his friend, basically, my wife's incredibly attractive, so you should probably try to see her naked. So he contrives this scenario where his friend is like sneaking into his room and hiding behind some clothes screens, trying to see the wife naked, and the wife realizes. So then she says to the chap afterwards, Gyges, she says, look, I know what you did. I know that it wasn't your fault. So here's what we're going to do. Either we're going to kill you, or you kill my husband, the king, and you take his throne. And then that's what happens.
Radical
so
solution.
It's Game of Thrones stuff here,
It's payback, I mean, you don't do that, guys. Just anyone listening in and having that exact idea at this moment was your pal. You don't do that, I mean, you fall in love with your wife, stick with your wife. Don't tell your neighbor to have a peek in, Don't do that. So there's my moral that's my moral comment. I could be writing the notes for these books. Modern notes by PJ.
That'd be something I would buy.
Yeah.
Then we have another example where Croesus says, he gets some vision or dream that his son's going to die in a fight, so he never lets his son go to the fight, and they eventually tell him, you have to let him go to the fights. They let him go, and he sends this chap, and he says, I want you to be his guardian. So the guardian immediately shoots an arrow, which goes stray and kills the son, arrow to the head. He's like, oh no, I was going to protect him, and I shot him in the head, So he kills the son. Just all this weird stuff is happening.
He's not going to get a job anytime soon again in that position.
No.
Might have
and
to
then
change.
we get a scene where just all this crazy stuff. So, for example, but mixed in with real history. The stuff about Hergus giving the laws to the Spartans and all this kind of stuff that is probably real, maybe a bit skewed, a bit mythical, but still there's some basis for it, So it's weird. And then we have massive segues for hundreds of pages where we move away from Greece and talk about ancient Egypt. And and then it gets really boring, and it's just talking about burial customs and all this kind of stuff. And then we get a lot of geography and a lot of stuff about the food that the people would eat in Scythia and Egypt and Persia. It's just a bit all over the place. It's not well constructed, Herodotus. That's my criticism for Herodotus. Take notes. But one of my favorite stories is, and again you'll see why it's more like Homer than Thucydides. They have a nice scene where they say to this chap, I think the chap annoys him or whatever. So he says, don't worry, look, it's all fine. We'll have a banquet. And then he goes and kills the chap's son, cuts him up, and feeds him to his dad. This is out of Homer. This is not history,
Well, tell George or Martin, just, you're not that original. This stuff already existed, right?
Yeah. And then after being forced to eat his own son, he then says, well, I guess this guy's not going to hold a grudge. I'll put him in command of my armies. So it's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense.
Look, the way you're selling it sounds like a very amusing, if not absurdist, kind of book. But yeah, it doesn't sound like...
It was funny, yeah. There's a bit where they want to say Persians are better than everybody else, so we're going to take a Persian kid and another kid, put them in a room, and whichever one develops speech the quickest, and then the Persian's the best, because, well, of course, it's, it's just weird stuff happening. It's just a random mixed match of stuff going from Greece to Persia to Scythia, all over the place. People killing their sisters and... marrying their sisters and all this stuff.
This is just the usual Coronation Street material.
Yeah, the usual Coronation Street material.
That's where they got all their stuff from.
But then it's mixed with real history. That's the strangest thing about it, But look, I'm not going to dwell on it, because although I spent 2 weeks reading 3 volumes, those are the highlights. The rest is quite. There's parts that are really funny, and there's parts that are boring. But I think that people don't really want to hear too much about Herodotus, sadly. So I'm going to leave it there. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? I took copious notes, man. I've got so many notes on this, and then I thought, no one wants this,
Just too much. Just imagining. This could be another episode of I was going to say of the God. I can't even think straight. This could be. Now this has to be a separate kind of program. This, you could just talk about this, but just by yourself, a monthly episode, just talking about your comments on Herodotus and all these lads, and all the other chaps.
Here's another interesting one. This Persian chap, cuts his own nose and ears off.
Well,
spurting blood everywhere, so that he can go to the Babylonians and say, "Look what they did to me. I'm not on their side anymore. Come in," and then open all the gates and let the soldiers in. Did it to himself. Just self-sacrifice.
It's just normal. It's just normal stuff.
It's normal everyday history. This is why I don't respect Herodotus as much as Thucydides.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, it's just normal customs. This is what you do every day.
Normal stuff. This is how I spend my Saturday nights. That's just cutting off my own ears and various things.
Marrying sisters, killing sisters, then deciding to marry again. Yeah, it's just all over the place. Yeah.
Here's one of my favorite pieces. They're talking about. I think this is about the Egyptians, and they say when he dies, what they then need to do is, so in the open space around the body of the king, they kill and bury one of his concubines. First, killing her by strangling. Then they also kill and bury his cupbearer, his cook, his groom, his lackey, his messenger, some of his horses. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I heard that actually.
Because there's some truth in it. It is history, but it's just a bit wild, some of the stuff.
That's crazy. Yeah. But really, okay. My comment is, the interesting is, and my comment is that when you this everything's been written already, all this crazy stuff, when people think, well, that's really radical and violent, what was already written, X years ago. So I mean, so it's interesting to find that. Or like when we're talking about Lao Tzu, for example, as well, 2,500 year old philosophy, I think is still relevant. So a lot of it has been done already.
It has, yeah.
It does make me want to read. I'll tell you this. It does make me want to read bits of it, though. You kind of half sold it to me. I kind of sold it to me in the sense of I'll read what was funny, and then just leave the rest.
I think if you could just read the highlights, it's.
Well, you can edit it. You can do a small selection of the most amusing texts, and
man, I'll get right to it when I'm not podcasting and making music and painting and doing Orwell classes and history classes and art classes. I'll get right to it.
Orwell and Ireland classes, very specific, very niche. And you were, I'll just comment this to everyone out there. You were in a concert recently in Madrid, where while waiting for the concert to start, you were attending an online Greek history course.
I was in the arena with my headset plugged in on my phone, attending virtually a Plutarch's Greek Lives class.
Oh no!
Because my schedule had too many clashes, and I'd gone all the way to Madrid for this concert as well, which is ridiculous.
And you're probably reading Herodotus at the same time, weren't you? Like, trying to.
I had him with me.
Yeah, you had him with you at the concert.
No, I didn't bring it to the concert, but I had it with me in Madrid. Do you know a quick anecdote? Something that was quite funny, because I did a tour in Madrid, and the guy was telling me all these things. And it's always good to get local tour guides who have a bit of quirkier knowledge. Yeah. Some of the stuff he told me to do, he was like, "Oh, you see in there, you can go there tomorrow, and they'll let you in. Now there will be a policeman there, and he will say you can't go in. But if you just persuade him, he will let you in, and you can see the inside of this lovely house." And I'm like, okay, I mean, I might not do that. Like, I might not go and argue with a policeman tomorrow, And then he said, and this church, they've got some nuns in it, and they make these lovely biscuits. But you will have to go not to the front door, but if you sneak around to this little back door, and you go in and you walk through this dark corridor with no one in it, and you'll eventually come to the end, and you'll not see the nuns, but if you knock on a thing and put some money down, someone might put biscuits. And I'm like, what? That's amazing, but like I'm not doing that.
That's actually true. The second one,
I know, but I'm not going to do that by myself, you know.
But now the second one I've heard of, and the first one just sounds like he was kind of trying to get you to break in to a random house, and maybe the police will be okay about it. Yeah.
That's the fear, and I'm just thinking, look, both of these might be perfectly legit, but like I'm not going to do this. I'm only in the country for 2 days. I'm not going to get a fight with policemen and nuns, you know.
Nuns. Sounds like a P.G. Wodehouse novel. Oh god.
I'm gonna get to my next novel, man. I finished up my Orwell cycle. So I finished my Orwell class today, by the way, but I finished my Orwell cycle of reading, and it was his least popular novel, A Clergyman's Daughter.
Right.
So everyone told me, look, leave that one for the end. It's garbage. Okay. This book is garbage. Do you know what? It's my favorite Orwell.
Well, he said the same thing about Northanger Abbey, and I think that's everyone's least favorite.
Yeah, it's the same as Northanger Abbey. The worst one is the best one. Because if you're looking for Orwell, you're not going to find him in this book, okay? Right. You're not going to find the character who's alone in the world and thinks what's going on in this dystopia. You're not going to get that. But if you're looking for Orwell pretending to be Dickens, then you're going to get a lot of that in A Clergyman's Daughter. Right. We talked last time about how Orwell was a fan of Dickens, and this is essentially just him pretending to be Dickens. Now, I should say that it's not amazingly well written. It's split up into 5 sections, and there's just a time jump as you go from one section to another. And there's not really good explanations for what's going on. You kind of have to piece things together a little bit. But I'll give you a quick flavor of it. So there's this girl, Dorothy. She is the clergyman's daughter. And her dad is kind of a bad clergyman. He doesn't care about his congregation. He doesn't care that his church is falling apart. He's very miserly. He won't give her money to pay the bills. And, you know, she's asking for money. And he's saying, you've had all your allowance that you're getting this month.
Very Dickensian, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not her allowance. It's to pay the butcher. It's to pay for their food. Like, you know, and they're just not paying the tradesman. And he's outraged, you know. And he's like, you're not getting anything more from me. And there's a little bit of weird religious stuff where there's sort of they seem to be something in between Protestant and Catholic, and I didn't really understand exactly what their faith was, but it's not really important, to be honest. Yeah. Suffice to say, they don't like any of the other churches, and they just kind of do their own thing. And Dorothy goes around like very religious, praying all the time, pricking herself if she has impure thoughts, and you know, there's a bit of sort of puritanical type things as well. And they don't, you know, they're not allowed to worship nature. They're not allowed to worship basically anything. He doesn't like, he's not even really that fond of praying. It's very strange, you know, but that's fine. That's by the by. That all happens in the first part. And there's this one chap, and he basically decides he's a womanizer. And he's got all these like illegitimate kids, and he goes around and meeting girls in all these different places. And he decides he likes Dorothy, like this pure, chaste clergyman's daughter who's never been with any man. And he just continually tries to force himself on her. And she's like pushing him away and hitting him away. It's a little bit difficult to read in parts when we get to that. He's called Mr. Warburton. And he's like sneaking around and saying, "Oh, you've got such lovely arms, and you know, how are you not married with such lovely arms?" and all this kind of stuff. Okay. And there's an old gossip.
Wouldn't like to have him in a party.
No. And there's an old gossip, and they're worried that she'll see them together. Then we move on to part 2, and we wake up in a dream, and Dorothy's wandering around, senseless, not knowing who she is or where she is. And it's like, what happened? This is a weird time jump. What's going on? And then she meets these pure Dickensian chaps, and they're like homeless chaps, and they're going to work on some fields. And they're saying things like, "That's the mulligatawny," and all these little Cockney type things. And Dorothy joins in with them, and they're saying, "I've just got to stop and put the nail back into my shoe. That's the mulligatawny," and all this kind of stuff. And it's quite funny. And they're talking about their half crowns and everything. And
I like
then
the sound
they go
of it.
and it's a good one, man. They go and they do some work in the fields. Yeah. And there's a long sections of them just working in the fields with these poor people, and they're sleeping in hay. But they sing songs, and they sing songs like "'Twas Christmas Day in the Workhouse," and very depressing songs like that. And then they see a newspaper about the rector's daughter and how she went off, and they think she's gone off with this Mr. Warburton in a passionate scandal because he's left the town at the same time. But she doesn't remember who she is at the start. She remembers later. But but she's seeing these pictures of the rector's daughter, and she doesn't know that it's her. And then we have another weird jump where the chap that she's with gets arrested. We have another weird jump, and now she's homeless, and she goes to her uncle, some rich uncle, and he gets her a job in a school. So now she's in a school, and it's very Dickensian school. Like, it's taken out of I can't remember which Dickens it is. It's a Nicholas Nickleby, maybe. One of the Dickenses that has like the traditional little school. Okay. And this is the teacher, and she's always saying things like, we don't care about educating the kids' minds. We just care about the profit. So we make them copy out these pointless exercises to show to their parents so that the parents are happy. And this girl's trying to teach them things. She's like, these kids are all brain dead idiots because no one's ever taught them anything. And she teaches them geography and makes maps with them. And she teaches them, history, and she brings in books, and she brings in Shakespeare. And the parents come in and complain, and they say, what's this dirty text? What's this Shakespeare? Someone told me this was high literature, but there's filth in it, and I will not have my child learning this Shakespeare filth.
Well, when Juliet, it's very influential. The teens read that. They get some
and
ideas.
They starve this poor girl, even though she's a teacher. Like, they barely let her eat any food in the house. Everyone's starving and poor. It's very Dickensian. And in the end, she gets a big telling off.
Don't tell the end, dude.
No. Well, I mean, in the end of this section,
okay.
She gets a big telling off for what happened in the school, and at one point she's staying in a brothel that she kind of doesn't realize is a brothel because she's so innocent. And then it gets weird because there's just a big section which is like, do you know the way sometimes in a book a character will walk past a few people and they'll give you a few snippets of their conversation. And you might get a few lines that's a snippets of conversation. Now imagine that those few lines last for 30 pages. Okay, so there's just like an entire section of the book that's just fragments of like 10 different people's conversation, and it's all over the place. Wow. And it doesn't make any sense, and it just goes on and on and on. It's very, very strange.
It's obviously very influenced by Ulysses, because that's what happened in Ulysses. In the whole book, it's just fragments of conversations, and like when I read it, there was literally 100 pages. There was one point in the middle where there's 100 pages I couldn't understand. And it's very fragmentary, and especially that dream scene is like the night town scene in Ulysses. So it's like near the end, it's kind of becomes very mad and it's very dream-esque. People get arrested, all kinds of stuff happening, and they're also in a brothel. So it just it sounds like he's kind of pastiching some modern authors he likes and Dickens. It sounds like a very kind of. This sounds like he's just experimenting truly.
I think he was, yeah.
And whereas the other ones was like, this is my kind of thing, but now I just want to make something completely different.
Yeah. But the strangest thing is this, it's a 30-page segment of fragmented dialogue, and then it just moves on from that. Like, it just doesn't fit the rest of the book, really. And, it's all these different characters, and they're all homeless, they're sleeping in the streets, and there's like 20 of them piled on top of each other for warmth. And the policeman keeps coming along and saying, stop making that noise, or I'll send you to your homes. It's like, well, they don't have any homes. That's why they're in the street. You can't tell them off for being in the street and say...
So is it being very, it's basically a parody kind of a...
It is a little bit,
farce,
yeah.
A farce kind of.
And it's farcical. It's just when the policeman is just like, if you're going to keep on being unsightly out here, I shall have to force you to return to your homes.
I'd love to read it. That sounds great.
A really good one. And then, there's all these Dickens type characters as well. One of the women's like, I don't want to go see my husband because, one black eye in a week's enough for me, and all this kind of stuff. It's... Yeah, all the usual. But I'm not going to give away the ending. Like we generally never do. But basically, it's quite sad because there's two possibilities for the ending, and neither of them I don't think are happy. One route is that she essentially goes back to her dad and just continues with her boring life that she didn't really like now that she's lost her religious belief anyway. And the second option is that she goes with the sex predator, Mr. Warburton, and marries him. Like, those are the two options that are presented.
Well, as usual,
and she kind of has to,
pick
like which one is the least awful, So that's A Clergyman's Daughter, but it's a really, really fun one to read, even though it's a bit erratic and the different sections seem to not relate to each other. The characters are good. It's essentially Orwell thinking, what if I was Dickens instead of Orwell? And then he wrote that,
Oh, I like that, actually. I like that idea. I'd love to read it.
It's a nice one. And why don't you tell us about what you've read, PJ?
So I've read. Well, yes, I've been keeping it minimal indeed this month, but here is a slim novel, kind of a novella. It's called The Heron and the Violet Flower, and in Spanish is La Garza y la Violeta by Rafael Arozarena. So kind of like it sounds like it's saying Rafael Rice sound with slight different spelling. And he is a Canarian novelist.
Ah.
So for those of you who don't know, I was born in the Canaries and raised here, and in Ireland. And he was born in the island next to mine. I'm in Gran Canaria. He was born in Tenerife in 1923, and he's basically kind of a modern, respected author. So particularly around the, I think, 50s or so onwards. And this is one of his latter novels, quite short. The Heron and the Violet. It tells a story. It's very short, but it's got a bit of an epic feeling. It reminds me of some Latin American novels like 100 Years of Solitude in some sense, even though it's not generational. It's only just the perspective of one boy. But basically, it's about this. It's about this boy living in basically what's Tenerife, was the Teide Mountains. So it's the biggest volcano in Spain, but it's told very almost kind of, especially at the beginning, it's told almost mythical. It's not so clear actually that it's this island, and only later do you find out it's the Canary Islands. But it starts off with this Montaña de Cristales. It's like a crystal mountain, and that if anyone who goes there will never come back. And his mother died near the top and is buried in snow, and that violets grow on the snow. That's the violet reference. So he just imagine his mother died there, and he just imagines her corpse kind of frozen but beautifully intact with violets growing on top when it's not snowing. But it's basically him, and like kind of like he's not actually clear how old he is, but it's implied that he's a teenager. But sometimes it's a perspective of a little boy, and it's very vague it's very vague in which time setting, what the age is, who the people are. It's very vague in that sense. It's almost fairy tale-esque, and I love that kind of storytelling. And it's about him and living with his father and grandmother in a kind of a rundown place at the base of the mountain. And they're very sad. They used to have a banana plantation, and there used to be glorious days of bananas, like having adventures in the banana plantation. And now he's stuck with his grandmother and dad, and the dad is just looking into the glass of wine and not talking. And it's all very sad, to be honest. And then we find out that he has a friend, and this friend is a girl. And her name is Maggie, but we think that Maggie is his love interest for a while.
Okay.
Right, that's what you expect. And yeah, he's quite obsessed with Maggie, and he mentions Maggie and the mother, La Senora Milton, so Mrs. Milton. So they're an English family, and they've kind of go back and forth between Gran Canaria, Tenerife and Britain. And we think that he's obsessed with Maggie, and that he just wants to meet her, and his aunt is taking care of the house while they're gone, and he goes to visit the aunt and actually wants to see the family. But we soon find out that it's not actually Maggie he's interested in. It's Mrs. Milton.
Ooh.
So it becomes a bit of a twist. Can't say much more than that and where it leads. But a bit of a Mrs. Robinson twist going on there in the Canary Islands. And not just that, but all of a sudden, it was a bit random. I found I was a bit slightly disappointed about this, because I like vague sort of things, and became very specific. Then he particularly wants to be a tennis champion, and it seemed a bit random, to be honest, because I thought it was starting off very mythical, sort of like this.
That's a bit unusual, yeah.
Yes, and because for me it brought it into a specific time frame, because all of a sudden the woman, she's modern. All of a sudden it seemed clear that it must be the 70s around that time, because like tennis started to become popular, British people in the Canary Islands, and he's not interested anymore in that kind of. His uncle is a fisherman. His dad used to be a banana plantation. He wants to be the best tennis player in the world. And guess what? Mrs. Milton did win the award for best female tennis player, I think. And he kind of wants to beat that. He kind of wants to be the champion himself. He wants to own that house because here's a second twist. I'm not going to say more. The house where Mrs. Milton lives, that whole area used to be owned by the boy's family. Spooky. So that's where he used to live and where the banana plantation used to be. But now it's owned by Mrs. Milton, he's obsessed with. Okay. And the idea is that, okay, he's obsessed with her. And is it love? Well, I can't say. But at the same time, she kind of took away his home. She didn't really, but that's the way he kind of sees it. That the land she's on now used to be his. And he feels like he kind of owns it, but yet there's also feelings for the family. And the book is all about that conflict, to be honest, that the Canary Islands have, that tourism and a lot of foreign people coming there. And to be honest, half the population here is not Spanish.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a conflict between like that loss of identity because it used to be agriculture and fish industry, and now it's all about tourism. And it's a bit about that as well. That, you know, a Canarian person.
PJ, what about the prime Canarian business, the Donald Burger?
The what? The
Donald Burger.
Well,
remember, the Donald Duck burger joint.
Oh yeah, exactly. I know which one. Yeah, the Pepito Churrasco. Exactly. Yeah. So that's basically the twist, isn't it? The end of the story. So look, all I can say about this book is read Rafael Arozarena if you want to get into some prime Canarian literature. If I had written it, I would have focused more on the first part about the mom and like the mountains. It seemed more mythical. I enjoyed that kind of story, and it became more realistic later on. So mixed feelings about the book, but generally, I would still recommend it. But anyway, and there's a connection between. Yeah, there's obviously there's a lot of Freud and things going on. The mom reminds him. He all of a sudden he sees the kind of similarity between Mrs. Milton and his mother, who he barely remembers anyway. But the aunt keeps saying, "Oh, they look so similar, don't they? They look so similar." So it's this kind of there's a bit of a Freudian kind of twist going on there, obviously. But I enjoyed the mythical kind of mountain background and that always kind of hanging over him. I always enjoyed that kind of stuff in a book. So yeah, give it a read. That's one of the things I read. And Dean, I really want to hear.
That's awesome.
And you've read 2 books, which we're going to talk about now, which I'm really excited about because those.
I'm going to get to those in a little moment.
Those are exciting.
But I have a little segue. So I thought that you also read some comics. Do you want to briefly just mention those?
I do indeed. Yes, I know your opinion of comics, Dean. I'm amused at your kind of. I can hear the forced neutrality in your voice.
I told you off mid-month. I told you off for watching Spider-Man. Remember?
Exactly, you did. So that's what you did. Well, guys, I do want to tell you, because that's my part of the show, that I've been setting old Spidey aside and having go Daredevil. Have you ever read Daredevil, Dean, or watched any of the films?
I did actually see one of the films. Yeah.
Really? Okay. And I can see from your.
I'm not very big on it.
Well, look, guys. All I can say is give it a read. I started reading I think I'm on comic number 7, the original, the first volume ever of Daredevil, which is really actually fantastic. I love it, especially the first comic. So it loses its way a slightly bit. It becomes a bit silly at times, but the first comic is really about. Oh, dude, yeah, that's it. That's
the comics become the cartoon fellows in the comics become silly.
Well,
I would never guess that now.
Well, that's a twisting. Yeah, that's a good say. and he wears a yellow costume. Actually, he wears a yellow costume.
He was red.
Yeah, no, he wears a yellow costume. So I think volume 7, 8 was a bit distracting. But to be honest, like I still think it's a great concept. It's a great concept. Okay. A blind person. So it's basically he's blind and using all his other senses to combat crime. Come on, you gotta love that. And he pretends to be like a gullible kind of lawyer in his free time. I love that. I think it's great.
It's certainly written content. Yeah.
Well, there you go. So this is me. That's my recommendation. Give it a read, guys.
Cool. The reason I wanted you to mention it now is because I didn't read a comic, but I read an Orwell essay about a comic.
And what did he say about the comics?
But he was reading, so I didn't know that there was such a thing as good comics, but apparently there are. He was reading these English comics, The Magnet and the Jam, and he said they were out of fashion even then. And it's about all these people in these old, like, Eton-type schools and a lot of little posh boys and doing pranks on their teacher, and it's Billy Bunter and all these chaps going around, and it sounds brilliant. You know, it sounds. I thought, it's a lot of posh little English kids. This is amazing. You know. And he said all these American comics with their violence. We don't need those in Britain. We've got, you know, Billy Bunter and so forth. And the glamour of public school life, you know, and he says these schools are all founded in the 16th century, you know. And there's a funny bit where he says, like, these comics have been going on, The Gem and the Magnet, for 30 years. And The Gem was written by Frank Mitchell and The Magnet by someone else. And he says, obviously, this is a pen name. And a lot of different people have written over the years. And then he's a little asterisk where he's, but I've just received correspondence from Frank Mitchell to tell me that no, he did actually write all of those for 30 years. And the guy who wrote The Gem, that's also him with his fake name. So he wrote both of them for 30 years.
Oh, really? Oh, my God.
Yes.
That's bad.
It's quite funny that he put that little addendum, like, no, sorry, I've just been told off for that.
So hold on a second. So this is the guy who created Billy Bunter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I love Billy Bunter. Have you ever read any of?
I've actually never read any. So also, you know them good. And are they good? Would I like them?
Well, they're not. I didn't think they're comics. They're just comical novels. But anyway, Billy Bunter is. I loved it as a kid. I have to have a try again once. Like it's ridiculous stuff. It's PG Woodhouse. It's PG Woodhouseian, I would say, but slightly more grotesque because Billy Bunter is. It's all about like it's almost praising gluttony. You know, it's almost praising the fact that he just eats too much, and it's very absurd. But he gets into situations and into all kinds of ridiculous kind of situations. You can't help being amused. But I would say it's pretty politically incorrect nowadays. That's the only thing. Okay. Yeah, I don't. I think you know, some people in the health industry might have a thing to say about Billy Bunter.
Okay. Right. Well, they sounded more appealing to me than the American comics that have taken over. And I very, very quickly read another essay about postcard artwork. And really? I only bring it up briefly because it gives us an idea, a little insight into the typical life that Orwell talks about in his books. They stand for the worm's eye view of life, for the music hall world where marriage is a dirty joke or a comic disaster, where the rent is always behind, the clothes are always up the spout, the lawyer is always a crook, the Scotsman is always a miser, the newlyweds make fools of themselves on hideous beds in seaside lodging houses, and the drunken red-nosed husbands roll home at 4 a.m. to meet the linen night-gowned wives who wait behind the door with a poker in their hand. That's the tip. That describes perfectly the world in, like, coming up for air and keep the aspidistra flying in most of these Orwell novels. So I just thought it was a nice little aside. But look, I did read 2 more books, and I discovered that they're 2 of your favorite books, and we're going to get to those in just a second. But first, I'm going to play a quick. It's only a minute and a half. It was sent in by a fan. It's Erland from the podcast. Well, that aged well.
My book recommendation is Berlin Diaries by William Shirer. It's a non-fiction book, and it's not really a classic in the sense of being classic like you just do. I'm sorry about that, but it's one of the reasons I want to recommend this book is because William Shirer firsthand experienced what it was like to be in Nazi Germany, and he was there is oppression, and he writes about this in his diary. And you get to see what it's like to live under the Nazi regime from an American correspondent. And he's one of the pioneers of corresponding as well. So his story is super fascinating, and I don't see why Hollywood hasn't made this a movie yet, because it really should be. Every page is a page turner, and you get his own regards of the view of the Nazi regime. while the Nazis were at the height of its power. And I don't have anything but recommendation for this book. So that's my recommendation. My Instagram is well.h2well. And my podcast is well.h2well.
There we go. Thank you, Ireland. From Well That Aged Well, History Podcast, with his recommendation for us. And we did a crossover with him before. I did an episode about the Odyssey, if you remember a while back. Yeah.
And I've heard of this book, and it's supposed to be really good. The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Yeah, I've heard of it. So it is supposed to be kind of a quintessential book about the history of Nazi Germany, and the fact that an American journalist wrote it, I always think makes it better, because it just seems a more slightly objective perspective. I don't want to read it. I want to read that more than from a German historian. It's slightly less emotional, I feel. And this guy lived also in Europe, so he kind of knows. He does know his stuff, as far as I know. I haven't read it though yet. Thanks for that recommendation.
Thank you. And just while we're paused, I should say, guys, if you want more of us, because people are saying to me, PJ, we're getting these messages, and the people are saying, I really wish we had things like, Shakespeare reviews, Agatha Christie reviews, people talking about ancient Greek court speeches, very specific request, ancient Greek court speeches, 10-year-old interviews.
Yeah, they specifically requested to do a review of the show. What's the show again with Richard Ayoade? Yes,
we had people asking for Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. So, guys, it's all on the Patreon.
Not
Patreon.com/booksboys. No Travel Man. So we've gone with the first episode's out, but we're about to record the 5th. There's only going to be 6. This is a limited series of 6 episodes. I conscripted my friend Robert to do it with me, and it's called Dark Place Dreamers, and we review the ridiculous 2004 show Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, which is a bunch of guys pretending that they made a show in the 80s, which was a hospital drama horror show where they open the gates of hell, and there's like a monster of the week type thing, and they've all got shotguns, but they're in a hospital. It's very weird. And there's a lot of cool 80s synth music, and it's terribly made, and you can see the strings on the things and the camera cuts. And you got Matt Berry and Richard Ayoade and cameos from people like Noel Fielding and Julian Barrett. And it's the best show I've ever seen in my entire life. I think it was made just for me, but it's also ridiculous. And I think anybody else who watched it would think it was awful. So we reviewed the first episode. Well, the first episode is already out. We've also got 10-year-old interviews from The Vault with Susan Lee Picking's episode just came out. A lovely little singer-songwriter. And we talked about her album, Wander in the Wander. And then we also had a couple more episodes of the Greek court speeches. That's Forensic Friends. And PJ, I think if we have time, we will do a Playboys soon. So there's plenty of stuff on the Patreon. So hopefully everyone wants to check that out. And if it was any cheaper, we'd be paying you, So.
Yeah. So go ahead, guys, and give it a try.
That's it. PJ, the next 2 books I've read, I feel very strange, by the way, because I normally keep my pile of books with me. Little Alfred normally guides them for me.
Well, don't worry, Dean, because I've got your books right here in front of me. The books you're mentioning.
I do have one of them, but the other one, a mutual friend of ours lent me, and I've given it back to him.
Indeed.
And all the Herodotus books I've given back to the library. So I'm sitting here with just Orwell, really. But I've got this one. Relato de un Naufrago by Gabriel García Márquez. Now, I did a tour of the world here, PJ.
A tale of a ship cast, right? Indeed, not just that, but we are holding the same edition.
We're holding the exact same edition on the cam. We've got a mirrored webcams now.
Exactly.
But I should just mention quickly, because we're about to go to South America for this one. The next one's going to take us to Japan. We've been in England. We've been in ancient Greece. This is like an episode of Feel Good Hit of the Summer, man. We're going all around,
That's another one for the vote right there. Check it out, guys.
So I don't have a massive amount to say about this book, mainly because it is quite short. Like it's a very, very short little book, only about 180 pages, and they're small pages as well. I read it in a day and a half, something like that.
Very short.
It's a very short novella. I love the striking cover art though. With the sailor, in the water with a seagull in his hands.
It's generally one of my favorite book covers ever invented. I mean, you can see a picture, guys.
There's later. Pictures of it on our Instagram already in preview. So
exactly, but by the way, it's called "The Story of a Shipwrecked Sailor," which is maybe in English. Okay, so I was confused about that. Relato de un Naufrago. Okay.
I read it in Spanish anyway. I picked it
Yeah.
up in Madrid. And the waiter in this one restaurant was excited that I'd bought Spanish books, but then not excited that I'd bought Latin American books. And I suppose that'd be like going to Oxford and saying that you'd bought English literature, but then bringing out American stuff. I can get why he's annoyed,
Okay.
But what happens in this one? Look, I was also disappointed at the beginning to find that it was nonfiction. I thought I'd bought a novel, and then I realized afterwards that I hadn't. But I really enjoyed it anyway, so that became irrelevant.
Yeah.
I generally don't go for nonfiction, but you don't even notice because it's told like a story.
Totally.
So
Totally,
it's fine,
totally.
So the chap becomes shipwrecked, and essentially we just, it's a 10-day ordeal he has trying to survive on this raft. And he just tells us about the birds that come, the sharks that come, and he's trying to keep himself safe. He doesn't really have anything to eat or drink. He thinks he's going crazy at parts, and he's hallucinating things. It's just a good story. I mean, you've read this one, you love this one. So do you have anything to say about it?
Well, not just have I read it. I think I've read it about 6 or 7 times. This book.
Wow.
This is. I read it when I was just before I became 18, and I was getting really into Latin American literature. It was just taught in my school, and I'd read a lot of Spanish because I went to Spanish school. I read a lot of Spanish novels, loved it, but it became a bit. I just read too many, and I thought Latin American books, and I'm afraid me and that waiter would have a lot to talk about. I would take a Latin American novel anytime instead of a Spanish novel. Sorry. Do love Spanish mainland literature, but the novelists for me are the ones in Latin America in general. And 100 Years of Solitude is one of my favorite novels of all time, books. But this one, even though it's a lot less well known, is almost on the same level for me. Because this is the ultimate Robinson Nade's book. For me, it's even more kind of effective than Robinson Crusoe, because it's truly being 10 days and a castaway raft, and he's hungry, he's seeing things, it's very introspective. It's just about what's going on in his heart, because it doesn't talk too much about what he's thinking. And I just feel like every time I read that book, it's like I can taste the salt. I'm really on that raft with him for 10 days. It's always he's always talking about the sharks, and he has to keep away from them. And yeah. And I just love
but he does catch one, or he tries to eat one or something at one point, doesn't he?
Exactly, yes. And it's not so much of a wow, the story is amazing, but it's just the realism and that particular atmosphere, like The Man in the Sea. I love that book too. I love all these books that are set in seas. So for me, it's that great atmosphere. And the Spanish, I mean, it came out in 1970, I think, after he became famous. It was 100 Years of Solitude. But this was written for the newspaper in 1955, and Gabriel García Márquez was around 27, 28 when that came out. So imagine writing that 27, 28, and I think it was banned as well. And he had to leave anyway. He had to leave to Paris. No one.
Oh.
It was a big controversy in Colombia because this guy was actually. The problem is this is based on a true story, and if you read the book, it's really criticizing the government. So this was not a pro-Colombian book. It was a very anti-government book. So,
I understand that he gave the rights to the actual guy that the story was based on.
Exactly, yeah. And he actually says that, well, this is not my story. I'm just helping him put it into words. And I'm wondering, but how true is that? Are you just being? I feel like he's being modest. It's just too good. If he did that, then he's an excellent sort of co-mediator as well as an author, which it could be. It could be literally taking those words and then making.
Because it does read like a novel. Like it doesn't read like a boring factual account. It's an enjoyable one.
Totally, I love it. Absolutely love it. And I highly recommend it. And if you can, read in Spanish, guys. The prose is simple and sweet. It's easy to read. Yeah. Like Old Man in the Sea. I love that kind of literature. Short and easy.
It's easy to read. I didn't really struggle with the language at all.
Totally, yeah. Did you feel like, Dean? Because honestly, I've read that book and I remember a few times just reading it straight afterwards. Even though the story might not be spectacular, do you feel like there could be a book that you just read out of relaxation, because for me it's like it's one of those novels I just feel like just want to read and relax.
Yeah, it was relaxing. I mean, I read it on the day that I was traveling to Madrid. I really did it, mostly in one day.
Which is strange because the topic isn't relaxing. You know what I mean? But that's what I find so fascinating. It's not relaxing being cast away, but yet it feels very relaxing to read it.
Yeah.
So,
and that brings us, PJ, to this month's sponsor. If you ever find yourself trapped in the ocean, just take out your mobile device and go to raftrescueservices.gov, and we'll send that raft for you.
Well,
so
yeah.
If you're ever stuck, that's all you need. Get the raft. And PJ, our second sponsor this month, I figured out why the kids aren't reading. They like something else called the sports. So this month we're also sponsored by Sports. It's the Big Fight. It's Jim Bob McGrimbob versus Person McPherson in the Big Fight.gov. So those are the things that the kids like, and we're doing a crossover there with them. So
check it out, guys.
That's this month's sponsorships.
Check it out.
We have one more book, which is that you've also read. It's Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World.
Hard-Boiled Wonderland to Sekai no Wari.
Yes. Now this one is. I didn't think I was going to like it, to be honest, because I wasn't a massive fan of Kafka on the Shore. I think it got a bit silly with the Colonel and everything, and I started this, and immediately the first few pages, I thought, oh no, we lack some world building. I thought there's not been enough world building, and already it's giving me technical terms about these creatures and these people and their jobs and their things and a lot of scientific terms, and I don't know what's going on. Now, you find out pretty quickly what's going on, but just in the beginning I thought like there's a lot of terminology I'm not familiar with. I feel like I've been dropped into a world I don't know. I would have liked a bit more world building first or something, and I felt a little bit like I'm not going to like this, but I was completely wrong. I absolutely loved it, and again I read I loved it. Yeah.
Oh, really? Because I remember you writing at some point saying, "I'm not sure about this." I said, "Nah,
yeah, that was in the beginning," and I read it over 3 days. After the first day, I thought, I'm not sure if I like it, but I still can't put it down. And then after the second day, I thought, no, I really, really want to finish this. And the third day, then I raced to the end. So
I love Hard-Boiled Wonderland, and it would have to be. I think I've read almost every Murakami book in English. Maybe not the most recent ones, but I've read a lot of them, and even bits of it in Japanese. It's absolutely. I love this book. It's the first book I read, and still, for me, it holds a very dear spot in my heart. I love the map. I'll be honest with you. I love maps anyway. I love maps in all kinds of books, but I just love this particular map. I'm not sure if your edition has one, but most editions have this a map of the end of the world, because do you want to tell the plot, basically, or...
Yeah, sure. So essentially, and you've actually read it more times than I have, so you probably know. Even though I've read it more recently, you probably know it better than I do. But we essentially have what seems like two separate stories.
Yeah,
and we have Hard-Boiled Wonderland, and we have the End of the World.
So one is a noir story, and the other one is a fantasy story, basically.
Yeah. So the End of the World is kind of this world where they're in this little town. He's separated from his shadow. There's a gatekeeper who won't, now and again he lets him see his shadow, but he's essentially stuck in this walled town. Yeah. It reminded me a little bit of some of the scenes that happen. Actually, I can see an inspiration from Murakami with your own writing.
Totally, it was very inspired by that.
There's a few things,
right, particularly the end of the world part. So yeah, because basically he has to. It's just a kind of a man with a shadow, and he for some reason. He needs to enter this fortress town, but he has to leave a shadow beside in kind of an apple orchard. But he has to enter without a shadow.
Leave again.
Yeah, he can't leave again because
But interestingly, no characters are named. It's just the guy, the librarian, the gatekeeper, the chubby girl. No one's named in this book. And the End of the World chapters are shorter typically. But he wants to. Help his shadow get back together. He wants to find a way out, but meanwhile, he's got to read dreams in the library with the librarian. And he can't go into the woods because that's dangerous. And that's a nice little contained piece. But then we have the main story, which is this chap who's essentially some kind of data processor. Like, they'll get him to process data using his own body, like a kind of computer, and he'll shuffle the data and, protect it so that other people can't access it, essentially. But he used to work for this old man, this old professor, and they go into an underground lab that's like through the waters and everything, but there's these creatures called Inklings that are trying to get to them, and they're using like some kind of sonar pulses or something to keep them away. But they go in, to this kind of bunker, but then the old man disappears and whatever. And then there's some weird scenes though, and it happens in both stories where people just offer to sleep with him very willy nilly.
That's a very working.
The chubby girl's like, well, she's 17 as well. It's like, well, how's things? Would you like to take me to your bed, sir? It's just, it's just a little bit strange.
Murakami has been deeply criticized for that, especially in the last few years, was the rise of feminism in Japanese literature. I remember there's an interview with a few female, because it's become very popular actually. I love female literature. They're purposely kind of marketing that in Japan now,
right?
Because it used to be very male centered. And there was like an interview saying, like all these female authors saying, Murakami, really like your stuff, but your portrayal of woman, you need some work on that, man. And he actually took it on well. He actually said, "Oh, fair enough. Yeah, I'll take that into consideration."
Okay, good. Yeah. Because I didn't think some of the women characters are good, like the librarian, and things like that are good, and the chubby girl is she's not independent as such. She relies on her granddad, but she's a strong character in some ways. But then there's just, the librarian wants to sleep with him. She wants to sleep with him in the dream world. The other librarian wants to sleep with him. And they all always ask in a really strange and unnatural way. It's like, were you planning on inviting anyone to your bed tonight? Because I'm definitely available if you were thinking about that. It's just a really weird thing. But, apart from that, I really, really loved it. And of course, I'm not going to spoil what happens. Why are there two different worlds? Yeah, obviously there's some kind of link for it. There's some kind of reason for it. But yeah, it's lovely. It's brilliant. Yeah. So I'm really, really glad I read it.
And I'm very inspired, particularly by the end of the world part. The end of the world part, actually, this was released in 1984, and around 1980. He finished a novella, which was basically the end of the world segment, and he didn't publish it. He was deeply unhappy. He thought it was garbage, basically. But eventually it turned into this 2-part novel. So it did actually start. It's kind of interesting. So he kind of found a way to mix them two together. But it did start as, okay, I've got this end of the world part was a shadow. That's kind of the premise. You just thought, okay, shadow and a man need to separate for some reason. Fortress town and then eventually it came out, I think, even as I think it came out like a protocopy, but it's never published. I think it's a very rare book. Love to get my hands on that one. If anyone's going to give me a Christmas gift, guys, please find me that copy of the original End of the World, just that part novella. And he turned the novel was just great. And I find that both of them mix very well together. And the map is such a delight because you keep looking back in the map and imagining where it is. And yeah, I think it's absolutely great. And there's love. It's a very much a postmodern book. He's very much a postmodern author in the sense of these postmodern authors are very influenced. They're very influenced by all kinds of literature and take what they want. It's a bit like a clergyman's daughter, to be honest. That sounds like more of a postmodern book. But this one is particularly deep in science fiction, noir, and fantasy, and it's a detective at the beginning. It's a bit Philip K. Dickens, not Dickens, but Philip K. Dickensian. And no, I love it. I think it's great. I'm glad you enjoyed that. I like Kafka on the Shore, but I can. It's different. This one here. This one is really getting even more surreal. Did you like Norwegian Wood?
I didn't. Norwegian Wood, I don't think I've read.
Because it's his most popular book, but this was written, I think Norwegian Wood was the first novel, written after this one. But it's so different because he actually said to himself, I want to write something different than I usually write, kind of like George Orwell did, Clergyman's Daughter. and it became fascinating enough his most popular book. At a very controversial opinion, everyone, but it's among my two least favorites Murakami books.
Wow.
I hardly enjoyed it. I'll be honest. Sorry, Murakami, but I love most of your books. So it's interesting that people's opinions, Norwegian, what is the big thing? This was kind of forgotten in Japan, even though I think this is such a beauty of a book.
Just when you mentioned Philip K. Dick, I took a picture in Madrid. I meant to send it to you. Because when I was in the bookshop in Madrid, they had a whole shelf of Philip K. Dick.
Really?
And right beside him there is Ursula K. Le Guin and some Ray Bradbury. You know what I find? The Spanish bookshops have a better selection of English books than any bookshop I've been in Northern Ireland.
And they pay a lot more, don't they? They pay
€20.
You
can't. You need to remortgage your house to take like three books.
It's ridiculous, but like it just shows you that they really appreciate though, that they would actually pay.
And they have a lot of Dumas. They have a lot of Wilkie Collins. They have a lot. They have all the obvious classics. Your Jane Austens and whatever. But they have a lot of Wilkie Collins that I'm struggling to find in Belfast. They have there's more Ray Bradbury stuff there. There's a lot of stuff, and it's sad that they've got a better selection there than here actually.
Yeah, it's absurd, right? Oh Lord.
There's one last book I want to tell you about quickly. This is a book called Do Over by Juliet Rose. This is a really, really good book, but it deals with some difficult themes and it can be a little bit sad in parts.
Oh, okay.
So we have this girl, Sam, and she feels almost Orwellian, like she feels disconnected with the world, disconnected with herself. She doesn't really kind of know who she'll look in the mirror and not really even know, like, who is this person? Like, she's just completely disconnected from everything. And she has a friend, Miri. She sleeps with Miri's husband. They have a fight, and she says, you know what? Forget this. She packs a bag and just drives away. New life. That's it. Leaves a note for the landlord saying, I'm gone, and just goes to start a new life. And she goes to this nice little seaside resort, beach town, tourist summer place, And she gets a job working in the diner, and she meets a chap called Smitty. Well, she's called Smith, but she just decides he's called Smitty, and another chap, Casey. And she makes friends with them, but sometimes they're really fun, and sometimes they're a little bit off. Especially Casey can be quite moody, and she realizes that there's actually a lot of really hardcore drug use going on.
Wow.
And there's drug dealing going on, and then there's deaths happening. And it's in parts it can be quite difficult to deal with, but it is a really nice story. And of course we get a little love story thrown in there because I love a love story with Sam and Smitty. But yeah, it's one that keeps you going, and you don't really know till the end, is it going to work out or is everything just going to go to pot? Because it's very, very balancing on a thin wedge, most of the book. But it's quite a good one. And just a second, I think I hear the telephone ringing. PJ, what? I'm just going to go see who's on the line, and I'll be back in a few minutes.
All right.
Hey, you're through to Books Boys. Who's calling?
Hi, this is Juliet Rose.
Hey, Juliet, you got Dean on the line. How are you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm good, and it's such an interesting coincidence that you called in right when we were talking about your book, Do Over.
Very nice.
Which thank you so much for sending to me. I just finished it yesterday, actually, and I really, really enjoyed it. Tell me, well, it's not actually officially out yet, is it?
It is. It actually came out September 21st.
Oh, so it is out now. Okay, that's cool. So I'll put a link then in the show notes, and then if anyone wants to go buy it, then they'll be able to. Is this your first novel?
More or less. I wrote years ago. I actually was a pretty avid writer in my 20s and 30s, and actually put out a novel back then that's no longer in print. I may eventually put it back out. And then I took a 15-year hiatus from writing altogether.
Wow.
And then this year I decided I just needed to get back on board. And so this is the first novel I've written in a very, very long time.
Right. So what got you to go back to it? Like, what was the urge,
Life, like you start to say, okay, I don't live forever. I better jump back on board. And that was, I've always loved writing. I do art as well. And, for 15 years, I had little children that I was raising, and now they're older now. So I don't have to focus as much attention on them. And so this was really kind of my time to bring that back.
So you've got the time now to kind of do it.
For sure.
Brilliant. So, I mean, it's such an interesting novel because obviously we do have a love story at the heart of it, which, I'm a diehard romantic, so I always like a good love story. But there's some dark themes as well, particularly with the drug use and everything. Is that sort of, something that you've always wanted to write about, or what kind of brought that idea to you?
I think anything I write always has a dark element to it, because that's life. That's, we may have a love story, but most of us deal with some form of trauma or, struggles in our lifetime. And so I think it's more realistic to show that side of it as well.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point. It is more realistic, and it's interesting because the whole time you are rooting for the love story, because obviously we have the bit in the beginning where we see her pre-existing life with her friend Mary, and that all falls apart. And then with the main kind of story, you're just thinking like, please don't fall apart again. Like, I really want this one to work for her, and I want her to fall in love, and I want them to live together, with Smitty, and I want it all to kind of work out. And you're just hoping the whole time, and you're almost waiting for it to collapse, but you're thinking, don't.
That's a lot of feedback I've gotten. Everybody said, I really didn't know what was going to happen. And that's what I wanted to write, because honestly, when I was writing it, I didn't really know what was going to happen. I think realistically, it could have gone either way, and it would have still made a really good story. And so I think that ultimately, she had to come to herself to come to someone else. And that's what the real lesson is that, she couldn't really face connecting with anyone else if she didn't connect with herself first.
Yeah, I think that's something to take away from it. And it's very true. And, it's generally good advice for everyone. You need to have yourself right before you can do something with someone else. That's unfortunately also part of life. Are you working on anything else at the moment?
I am. I have a few things in the works. I'm one of these people that has a bazillion things going at one time. So I have a novel that I have finished, and I'm going through the editing process now, that's coming out in January, and actually takes a character from the story. So Aiden, who I felt had way more of a place from Do Over, he has a story 7 years later that I'm currently working on the editing. So and that's also got, a dark kind of twist to it. It's dealing with, some controversial issues, especially in the US, with police brutality and church control and things like that. So that kind of goes even darker than this one did. And then I have a novel coming out with Adelaide in May. That's called Trigger Point, and that deals with search and rescue, and specifically one of the main characters is a deaf dog handler, and so it kind of gets into that relationship and communication through that. So
okay, cool. So that's going to be a bit of a different vibe from Do Over then, I guess.
It is. I always want to take on something, I guess, like a social issue or an issue when I write. I don't always go as dark, although that one does also have kind of a little bit of a darkness to it as well. That the main character has to face some trauma that she's going through, and not in search and rescue, but within her own life. Right.
Okay. No, fair enough. So this one's really good. So I'll just to give a little bit of plot for the guys listening. So we have Samantha, and she's, again, we said, like, she's going through her own stuff. She kind of doesn't really identify with herself. So you mentioned in the book that she'll be looking in the mirror and not even really recognize that this is herself, which is a really interesting, perspective, because you're really rooting for her initially to, as we said, to get with herself before you even have the love story. And what was the decision with her first friend, with Miri, that they fall out with? Miri hits her in the end, and I don't want to spoil kind of the story, but were you sure that you didn't want Miri to ever kind of get back in touch, or is that something you kind of decided at the last minute? Or
I think when I write, I kind of like let the characters tell me. So I didn't know if this was going to be a resolution. And ultimately what I realized is to stay within the vein of, things don't always work out the way we want them to, and they don't always wrap up the way we want them to. And so in true relationships, people get to make those decisions. And so I did decide that, she destroyed it. She had no way of really, she could reach out and do her part and own what she did, but that Miri had the same choice, that she could decide whether or not she wanted to be back in Sam's life. And so I made that choice based on what I think would realistically happen.
Yeah, because I think I guess with writing, it might be too easy to tie everything up in a neat little ribbon, but you're right. In real life, Mary probably wouldn't have gotten back in touch. So it is
Right.
more realistic,
Yeah, I like to leave the reader a little frustrated because I feel like that's the truth of how I tell a story, is that, we want that happy ending. We want everything to be perfect. And sometimes there are things we have to sacrifice. And maybe we have partially a happy ending, but maybe we also lose some things because of choices that we make. And so I like to let the reader feel a little conflicted.
Yeah. And what's the inspiration for the town? So obviously it's a sad little town. Like, people are coming there, and it's a lovely little holiday village. But for the people, actually living there, it's kind of same old, day in, day out. It's kind of depressing. They don't have great jobs and all that kind of stuff. The kids are all on drugs. And it's really curious because, obviously I've never lived somewhere like that. So I'm coming in with the happy little holiday village for the weekend. And it's really curious to see, like, oh, this is what it's like for people stuck there.
Yeah. I've moved around a lot. I've lost count of all the states and cities and towns I've lived in. And I've lived in some small towns. And the thing that I found frustrating living in small towns was that the youth really tend to be kind of ignored. It's the focus. If it's a tourist town, the focus is on tourism. If it's a college town, the focus is on the college. But typically there's not as much for youth to really do anymore in these small towns. I've lived in small towns in Nebraska and New York, and I lived on Tybee Island in Georgia, which is a small town, and that's very tourist based. I grew up some of my years outside Wilmington, North Carolina, and it was small, and Wrightsville Beach was really small at that time, which now it's a huge tourist area. And so what you tend to see in those towns is you see that the locals are second thought. They're not primary to the decisions made for that town. And so I really want to address that because I've raised my own children in small towns and seen their struggles with that two words. Everything closes up at 6:00, and there's nothing for the youth to do. The movie theaters have closed, the roller skating rinks have closed, everything closes that really allows them to have a life. And so they tend to find things to do. And so quite often that's drinking or drugs or partying,
It's interesting because, you're right. In that sense, you're almost a second-class citizen in your own town then. Like, you're not thought of in like important decisions. It is just for the tourists who's bringing the money in.
Exactly.
Yeah, wow. And it's something I never thought of before, but it was hitting me a lot as I was reading it, because there's towns like that everywhere, and it's kind of sad, but I guess it's true. So it's an important issue, I think, to bring out that people maybe wouldn't have ever thought of.
For sure. It's definitely pervasive in small towns. And I think that unless you've lived in one, like, people don't think about that. I currently live in a small town. And if you go into town on the weekends, it's very quaint, and there's tourists everywhere. And there's, lots of things to do for tourists. But, when that all closes up, there's really nothing left.
Yeah. I think that's true of a lot of places. I mean, there's places even here in Northern Ireland that, if it's not a sunny weekend, then it's a ghost town,
Right. Exactly.
That's the way it is, Tell me this then. Have you done a lot of reading yourself, especially with the lockdown and things? What have you been reading yourself?
Lately I've actually been picking up a lot of dystopian kind of classics. I really like Octavia Butler, and I discovered her a couple of years ago. I was listening to NPR and they were talking about her writing, and I had never read her. And so I went and I got Kindred and I read it and I loved it. And then I read Parable of the Sower. And from there, I've kind of picked up other ones. I just finished Brave New World. I'm in the middle of 1984. I'm kind of going back on things I feel like were required in school, but I didn't necessarily connect to. And now I feel like as an adult, I really connect to them more.
Yeah. I'm actually, at the minute, I'm taking an evening class once a week on Orwell. So I'm reading all of his books. I'm not reading 1984 because, I've read it a couple of times anyway, but I've just reviewed like most of his other like lesser known novels. And they're all really different, but they have the same underlying Orwellian threads to them,
Right.
So it's interesting that you read that. I'm going to have to ask you then, Brave New World or 1984, like which one do you find the most powerful?
So they're just such different styles of writing. And that's where I was talking. My son really wanted me to read 1984 because he read it and he's like, you've got to read this. And so I started reading it, and I had read Brave New World, and the style is so different because Brave New World is like, it's a quicker pace. It's a lighter, almost kind of, idea of dystopian, where Orwell's so dense, and it's so like, you really have to pay attention to the minute nuances that he puts in there. I find his much darker than I found Brave New World. Brave New World I found to be interesting, and certainly the end was very sad. Like, I wasn't wanting that end. I wanted something different to happen, where with 1984, I feel like when I'm reading it, I feel much more of a heaviness from that.
Yeah, I I recommend 1984 to someone, I think at least once a week. And the more I see, with like technology and surveillance and everything, and people are saying, "Oh, this is great," and I'm like, "Have you read 1984 though?"
Right. Yeah. No. It's actually, you're reading, and you're like, "Oh, this is what's happening." Why are we not paying attention? No, it's a great book, and it's one that I feel like everybody should read. But it's not a happy tale for sure.
No, it's not. I always say, I think, younger age in school, everyone should read Animal Farm, and then maybe a few years later, when you're able to deal with the themes a little bit more, then read 1984. I hope we haven't given away the answer to the next question, but I always close every interview with the same question, and I don't give people prep time because that makes it too easy. So the question is essentially, if there was one existing book that you wish you had written out of anything that's ever been written, what would it have been?
Oh, honestly, I go back to Octavia Butler. I really love Parable of the Sower, which also it kind of falls into that, dystopian world. And when you're reading it, it so correlates to our current world. I have such admiration for her and what she put in her book. So I would say that's the one, I think.
Nice. I haven't actually read that yet. Is it one I'm going to have to go and pick up?
I would say so. If you really like those kind of dystopian type stories, I mean, and she does it in a really fluid way. It flows easily, but you're reading it and you're thinking, how did she write this so long ago when it's so pertinent to today?
Yeah, I think that's the sign of a classic, right? It's a sign of a great book that you could read it. I read ancient Greek literature sometimes, and even the plays and things, and sure, the details of the society is different, but when there's certain themes that still exist today, that's how someone's written something good.
For sure. It's like they're seeing into the future. It's amazing.
Yeah,
I love it.
It's great. Awesome. Well, do you want to plug your site or social media or anything like that?
Honestly, if anybody goes to my website, which is authorjulietrose.com, I have all my links to my social media, to my books, and upcoming events there. So that would be the first place to start.
I'll put a link anyway in the show notes, and they can hopefully pick up a copy of Do-Over. Thank you very much for calling in. Have yourself a nice day.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Do-Over there. That was
Wow,
conveniently timed.
That
We
was
must
great.
be masters of timing, PJ.
It's amazing how the universe just delivers exactly what we need.
10 times in a row. Did you know something? We're being sued actually because we call the show Books Boys, but last month we just did episode 13, and apparently we've contravened the Trade Descriptions Act. It should now be Books Adolescents. Now that we've hit 13, we're Books Teens.
Entering puberty. Entering literary puberty.
We have to upgrade to Books Teens.
Books
but
Teens.
there's a lot of remarketing, and I don't know.
I'm not sure.
We might just keep on breaking the law.
I didn't do we. Maybe you should be Peter Pan. I'll be Pippi Longstocking. You know what I mean? Keep that kind of inner child intact. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because then in another half a year we're book adults, books men. It's a lot of rebranding. It's too
book
much,
old
too
man,
much work, man.
book dead man. Yeah.
Yeah, book abuelos. I don't know. It's too much.
Book abuelos.
Well, PJ, we're going to wrap up, I guess, with our recommendations for this month.
Ooh.
I'm going to recommend one that you recommended to me many years ago that changed my life.
Really?
I'm going to recommend one that I also recently lent to our mutual friend in exchange for the Murakami book.
It sounds like a character of Dickens, our mutual friend, but we're going to keep him.
Yeah, I'm doing that deliberately.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
I
know.
I lent him an Agatha Christie book, and then there were none.
Yeah.
Many years ago, you lent that to me, and I've now filled my shelf with about 70 Agatha Christie novels. I'm not going to go into any great depth on it, but if you've ever watched a murder mystery show, I've seen episodes of Family Guy that rip this off. It's everywhere. It's in movies. Anytime you watch a show where a bunch of people go to a house or an island, and one by one they die, it's ripping off this book, basically. This is I think it's in the top 10 best-selling books of all time. It is the quintessential whodunit, locked room, murder mystery type scenario. And they die one by one, and you got to figure out, who done it. And I've read it twice, and both times it's surprised me. I lent it to our friend because it's a really good way to start. If you're not sure about would I like Agatha Christie or not, then this is the one to start on, and I can guarantee you'll like it. So.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. No. I mean, I read it myself. It is one of the best Agatha Christie books. Very unusual. So give it a go. And if you're fascinated in the slasher genre, well, what can I say? This started it basically. So give it a try. What I recommend is going on Japanese. I have to recommend one of the many, many, many Japanese books I love, and I have to recommend a classic Japanese book. In fact, he's considered the Dickens of Japan, and there's none other than Natsume Soseki. Also, you can say Natsume Soseki. And basically, this guy is someone who studied in England, a very bookish chap at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. And he wrote this book called Bochan, also known as Our Darling, and it just started this kind of modern novel trend in Japan, and it's very Dickensian, and it's very Balzac-esque, and even Galdosian. It's very, it's very kind of much that light realism from the 1830s, but it's obviously a bit late in Japan in the 1900s and 19 teens. So I have to recommend two books, please. Bochan, for the classic kind of light-hearted guy. He's a teacher from Tokyo, and he's going off to Matsuyama and bathing, a kind of resort, and it's ridiculous. It's absolutely so funny. It's really actually that's actually really hilarious. Actually, I rarely laughed out so loud, and even in translation, it's still great, and it's just lovely. And I've got to recommend one that actually Haruki Murakami recommends in the book, Kafka on the Shore, where the character reads Natsume Soseki, if you remember, in the library. And he recommends one called The Miner, which is very unpopular. And most people in Japan actually dislike this book because it's very different to his other stuff. Essentially, this is the most existential, like one of the most existential novels you can ever get, particularly the first half, just about a boy who left, I think, Tokyo as well, because he got someone pregnant. And kind of him in the forest, walking around and just not knowing where he's going, what he did. And there's a sense of loss, but also freedom. And he kind of becomes a miner. It's gritty and it's introspective, not funny, completely different watch. And that's what I love about Soseki. He's kind of manic. He's like, you don't know who exactly he is, and he had a strange sort of personality. Give it a try for fun. Give it a try for darkness. He's everything, Soseki.
Sounds good. And I should mention, because we did mention Dickens, I went to the Grand Opera House to see a musical of A Christmas Carol, and I was very, very happy. So I just thought, I did cry at the end when Scrooge gives him the turkey. I cried because it was very heartwarming and very touching. But
that's nice.
Yeah. And next month for Christmas, PJ, I'm going to give a spoiler here. I thought, what will the kids really love me to read next month for Christmas? So there's definitely going to be some Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. And I'm not going to spoil anything else, but there's going to be some more Spanish stuff. But definitely, I thought that Aristotle's a good one for the kids.
It's very Christmassy, You want to get that ethics, banged into them.
That's it. Well, guys, don't forget booksboys.com. Definitely tell your friends, because that's really good to get more people to listen. And patreon.com/booksboys. That's where you get this show early without some ads, and also with all the extra stuff.
It's got a lot of extras. It's piling up. I mean, I don't know where to put all this stuff.
There's so much. My shelves, my theoretical virtual shelves are full of extra stuff.
We have to do a clearinghouse, so do it.
And of course, we've got links on there to Instagram and everything else. And of course, hello to everyone listening on Radio Oxen, and we're happy to be on there. PJ, have you got anything else to add, or is that us?
I would just want to add, I just want to say hello to our mutual friends. If he's listening, and just hello, sir. Thank you very much for being part of our lives. I'm delighted that you.
And we're gonna have him do some stuff with us very soon.
Well, you've already said the gender. Okay, well.
Oh
indeed.
No!
Well, the mutual friend
will
be more involved, shall we say? And it's an unusual Murakamian kind of character. Murakami, Dickensian, everything put together.
That's it. And guys, go listen. I've had a lot of fun doing the Dark Place Dreamers, so go and listen to that, because it's been crazy. And if you want to contact us, or you want to send in an audio clip or anything like that, like happens, usually on the show, that's booksboys@hotmail.com. Give us a recommendation, say hello. Whatever.
Feel free to give us any books, your books, or books that you like as well, for us to recommend,
sure.
For us to review and to read. we'll be delighted.
That's it. And PJ, I thought we'd close this month with, do you remember the song One Night's Lovin' that we did about 6 years ago?
Yes, but I can't remember the melody now. I have to play it.
This song features some good guitar playing by yourself, a really nice solo, and some less good vocals by myself. But look, we'll see. I wanted to play my new song, but I didn't want to risk it, because sometimes when I make a new song, I think it's great, and then I'll listen, a month later, and I think, oh my god, this is garbage. So I didn't want. It's too soon. So I thought, why don't we play One Night's Lovin'? So if the DJ would spin that record, and then after that, you'll have our closing credits, and we'll be back in about a month.
Christmas.
I'll make you mine. A kiss, kiss, kiss. A bang, bang, bang. That's the way I'll make you mine. And the times they were good, and the night it lasted long. But when I wake up in the morning, I know you'll be gone. And sometimes I cry when I wake up all alone. Sometimes I cry and then we all alone. Sometimes I cry forever on my own. Sometimes I cry. I'll make you mine. A kiss, kiss, kiss. A bang, bang, bang. That's the way. Come on, give me a little kiss now. I'll make you mine. One night's loving satisfies, but all I want is a chance for one girl to stick around, so that I can find romance. make you mine. Kiss, kiss, kiss. Bang, bang, bang. That's the way I'll make you mine. But you stuck around and you said it's just because you can see through my swamp side and you know I'm looking low. And sometimes I cry tears of happiness and pride. Sometimes I cry my emotions are no longer high. Sometimes I cry you're always by my side. Books Boys was presented by TheDean and PJ Burke in association with Thaddeus Penguin Productions. This episode was brought to you by our sponsor, The Big Fight and Raft Rescue. If you would like to get in touch, you can email us at booksboys@hotmail.com or visit us at booksboys.com. The intro uses Driving in the 70s from the Of Soundtracks and Garage Bands EP by Trapdoor. And the outro uses Dog's Light by Bravo Max from the album of the same name. All music used is either podsafe or used with permission. If you'd like to support the show, go to patreon.com/booksboys, get the show early and all of our bonus Spoof Fan the Boys shows. And you can also check out our music on Spotify or Apple Music. Thank you kindly for listening to us. Please tell your friends, and come back next time for another episode of Books Boys. Read some books! It was quite a good show, PJ. I didn't do Middlemarch in the end, but maybe next month. Let's see. I'm already working on Isabel Allende and goodness me, Aristotle for Christmas. I mean, come on, what's better than that?